Real quick, let me direct you to my new self-publishing imprint, Envious Editions. There's a link in the description here for my big cartel. I self-publish my own stories for art's sake. Boring, blammo, my Eisner-nominated, Ignatz-winning comic book series started in 2007. Very legendary. You can get your own copies of any of these comics directly from me. Hit that link, and I will send them to you. You won't find these in stores. I don't distribute these in stores. Hit the link. Thank you very much. Enjoy the video. Oh, you guys have a Mark Bell poster in your kitchen?
Yeah, so that's a film festival poster he did for a film festival in Osaka.
Okay. Wow.
Look
Do
for.
you have the Wimbledon green figure that just came out?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thought it was kind of funny because Seth sent it to us and just kind of maybe didn't have any message attached to it. He just sent, like an image. And I said, "What the hell is this? Is this AI?" I'm furious. And they were like, "No, an action figure." I was like, "Oh, that's great. That's wonderful."
Are you
So,
do you handle Seth's work at D&Q, or is Chris still doing that kind of stuff?
no. Chris is really fully out. I mean,
Oh, I didn't know that.
we ask Chris things if we can't remember stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Chris has a very good memory. So
Yeah.
sometimes Peggy and I are like, when did we? And then we ask Chris and he's like, "Oh yes, that happened when and razzle it off." But he's at home working on his comics.
Yeah.
So, that's it.
Wow, okay. So who would deal with Seth, like, because Seth had a record or something I saw in the comic shop the other day, like a
Yeah, I mean it's funny because I just watched his interview with you and he talks about that a little bit. It's Tracy who Tracy oversees, any things we produce, like the record or whatever. But she also does like his private personal stuff. So like the illustration work or whatever.
Mhm.
He sends that to her and he ships that stuff to her. Some stuff he scans. I think but it's been a while since I've put together his work. Um, and then she does that, you know, he pays her. And so she has all these secret Seth files. Like, can't you just post that in the company Slack so I can see what kind of crazy thing Seth is, doing?
So
Um,
is someone like Seth at Toronto Quarterly is able to just go, I've conceived of a project and we're going to do it, or does he still have to go through somebody at D&Q to
uh,
that's it?
hmm. It's hard to say. I can't say for sure that we just say yes
Hmm.
to something. I mean, Seth has his audience, and so not only just like the comics audience that we would all expect that we all have, whatever, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
that there's a certain number of books that you're going to sell when you make a book.
right.
Um, and then there's always that kind of hope that other audiences might show up or something, right?
Yeah.
So Seth does have at this point, there's kind of these other audiences that have shown up for him. So I mean, we're not selling a ton of a record,
Hmm.
no matter what. It wouldn't matter who made that record. We would not be selling a ton of it.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's just kind of, it's those moments where you want to make something that's just kind of odd,
Hmm.
and Seth is kind of good for that. I mean, that's what his Palookavilles are all about now. Like you're always kind of wondering, what's the extra thing I'm going to get? Oh, it's a barber shop he designed for his wife. Um,
A puppet show. That was the
yeah,
weirdest.
what else could you hope for, really? I
Yeah.
love that. So
Oh
so
yeah.
that's the case with that sort of stuff.
Yeah, but it seems like you love that kind of like object making. And I when I was like researching like High Water, it seemed like it was basically the thrust of it was to make interesting objects that could be read or looked at, and that's what at a time when people weren't really doing that.
Yeah, and I'm trying to, and I think that was really, I think it was based on a few things. I haven't thought about that too much. Every now and then, like I don't have complete archives of all that stuff that I made.
Oh man.
Unfortunately, I know it's ridiculous. I'm hoping that some people do. I know where some things are, like I'm like, oh, I remember I gave that stuff to Kevin Huizenga. So hopefully Kevin has that complete set of,
Yeah.
that thing I made. But um, I think it was, it partially came from when I was working at the Million Year Picnic.
Hmm.
I worked at Diamond for a while, so I saw all the stuff that came through there. And it was definitely a time when it was mostly comics.
Hmm.
And then there were a lot of trading cards, but I wasn't seeing all the toys and stuff. There wasn't so much that, I think Spawn toys didn't really exist yet. So it wasn't just a flood of that kind of stuff. Um, and then working at the Million Year Picnic, and there'd be little drib and drab things like kitchen sink would make those kind of
Hmm.
oddball things, right?
Yeah.
And I always kind of liked the idea of that, even if it wasn't necessarily something that I wanted, like a Cadillacs and Dinosaurs box of chocolates, something. Which I somewhere in the archives I do have one of those. No chocolates in it, but
Yeah.
and so it was really like when I started doing high water, it was always about like, what can I do to make people pay attention?
Yeah.
Right. It would just be like, well, they're doing this, so I'll do this other thing. And so it just kind of came out of that. And it's fun. It's fun to make puppets or elaborate posters or whatever. That stuff's always just kind of fun to do.
Yeah. And this was in 1997, right? Is that when High Water started?
Oh, I don't know. That
Around
makes
there?
sense. That sounds
Yeah.
right. Sure. I mean, I guess that no, yeah, maybe earlier, but
Okay. Do
um,
you remember like what the landscape of comics was like at that time? I mean, were you like paying attention to mainstream as well as alternative comics because of your job?
uh, well, I would see the mainstream stuff, but I wasn't reading it. I wasn't reading anything. Like I wasn't reading the Vertigo titles or something like that, right? There were guys in the shop who were into that stuff. Um, and I was more focused on, I was ordering like the undergrounds and then and the alternative comics. So I was ordering like the Fantagraphics titles and just making sure we had deep stock on Hate and Eight Ball, and whatever else. And I would call up and I'd order the Drawn and Quarterly stuff, and I'd call up Chris and talk to Chris and place the orders. And I'd call up Last Gasp and order, like the Underground and all that kind of stuff. And those were regular things. Like I just would have like my checklist,
Yeah.
just a sheet of things I wrote down, and I would just go down the list and, like do a quick inventory ahead of time. And then, it was kind of the mini comics explosion too. So then I started writing to people to get the mini comics in. So
Yeah.
I was busy, and I hadn't been interested in, superhero comics in ages. I mean, it was really that kind of thing that once I discovered Love and Rockets,
Hmm.
and that was like issue 3 or issue 8. Issue 8, I think. 3 was still on the stands. Then I didn't care about any of the other. In fact, Love and Rockets might have got me back into comics.
Oh, okay.
Um, I had reached that kind of point where I was bored. I was like, we're just telling the same story again, or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, so that was so I wasn't paying attention to that stuff anyways, other than I could see it in front of me. Like I'd sit at the register and I just
Yeah.
see all that. And it was just all like a dark blur. That was
Hmm.
also a thing, is I thought all the covers were really dark and murky.
At that
So
time, yeah, I think so. I mean, that was like the beginning of like the extreme kind of thing, where everything was like really dark and
yeah, and it was be guys like Splat. I don't know, do
yeah,
you
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Splat, it'd just be, I just remember that, or uh who did the Max? God, I should know that stuff.
Max Keith, I can't remember
Sam
his name.
Keith,
Sam
right?
Keith. Yeah, Sam Keith.
Yeah. And so all that stuff was like, black was like the dominant color, or dark blue, or
Yeah.
or, fetid green or something. So it was just all it all looked, it really was like I would look out and just not see anything really.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
was that was a big part of like making objects, is that I wanted something that would stand out, something that didn't fit on the shelf.
So you're managing Million Year Picnic and you're like in your 30s at that point, right? When you decide that you want to do high water.
Yeah.
Did you have any kind of um like fear of like what am I doing with my life? Like I need to do something better than just manage this comic book shop. Like I should.
No, and I wasn't the manager, by the way.
Oh, you
I
weren't?
just,
Oh, okay.
no, I just ordered that stuff. There was if anybody was the manager, maybe it was Mike, but I can't remember if we actually had titles.
Hmm.
I weirdly, I never thought like, what am I doing with my life? I mean, I look back at it now and I'm like, what the hell is wrong with you? You know, you could, why were you just like kicking around at these crap jobs
Yeah.
uh, for so many years? But I didn't want to work in an office, I guess. I didn't have very much, I wasn't very good at fitting in,
Hmm.
being reasonable. So these jobs worked out, I
Hmm.
mean, record stores and comic shops are kind of classic misfit jobs, right?
Right.
Um, and so, but I was ambitious and kind of evangelical about comics. So I
Hmm.
really did believe that if people saw, these great comics, that they would be really into them,
Hmm.
which was, largely wrong, but, and not completely. So that was really like how I, started distributing and publishing and stuff, is that I just wanted people to see these comics that I thought were great.
And were you publishing mini comics at first?
Yeah, I would distribute and sometimes produce the comics. So like, Matt Brinkman might have a bunch of leftover oaf covers,
Mm-hmm.
so I would photocopy the insides.
Yeah.
So if you have an oaf that has a staple instead of sewn, that's an oaf that I made.
Okay.
And Matt sewed them on a sewing machine.
Mm.
So that's the difference between, that kind of thing. And so I would make mini comics for those guys. I did the same for a bunch of the Fort Thunder guys. And Greg Cook, like I had a
Yeah.
stack of make readies, and then I would just go and photocopy that stuff and sell those. And that was because it was nearly impossible to distribute mini comics, because you would write to a person, you'd read about the mini comic,
Mm.
and then you'd write to the person, and then like by the time your letter got to them, they would have sold out of their print run of 20
Yeah.
or
Right.
whatever, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
then and they write you back and say like, oh, I don't have any more, but I'm thinking of reprinting, and then you'd write a letter back like, oh, well, if you do, I'll take 10,
Yeah.
and then maybe you never ever
Yeah.
hear
By
from
that
that person
time.
again, or maybe
Yeah.
10 show up in the mail. But then, and I worked at a comic shop, so then I could sell what I bought from somebody to the comic shop.
Yeah.
They'd be like, well, we don't have any here, and I'm not going anywhere with these right now. So it was, a kind of ridiculous distributor. But then I started doing shows, like and I don't know if I did shows before I created High Water. But then I started doing shows. So then I would take all that stuff
Hmm.
to, to the shows and sell the stuff there. So that's when I started, when I had the idea, well, if I produce these myself, then I can have as many as I need
Hmm.
for a show, and then I'll just pay the person for, what I make.
How did you meet the Fort Thunder crew?
Um, that was, uh, I met Jessica Campbell, and I must have met her, at SPX or something. I can't remember. But I was doing a series of signings at the store, and so I tried to do is get 2 or 3 people to come, because it was still, somewhat obscure people like John or Tom Hart or Dave Cooper, or just anybody. I would just
Yeah.
ask, any like alternative cartoonists. So I tried to do them in groups of 3, so it would be kind of like a mini event. And so Jessica was driving out from Chicago with Joe Chiapetta, and she said, "Oh, you should get this kid Brian Ralph. He was just in Jerome Gaynor did a anthology called Flying Saucer Attack."
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, and so Brian was in that, and she said that kid's in Providence, so get him on the bill.
Hmm.
So I was like, okay. So so Brian and Paul Lyons and Brian's girlfriend came out to the signing. Um, and so we just, so I met Brian
Hmm.
and became friends with him. And then he said, I have all these roommates who do comics too. And then of course it was, he just keeps trying. I was like, what? And
Yeah.
each one was like better than the last, I was like, what's going on here? And Providence isn't far from Boston, so I would drive out there.
And what was it? Was it just a warehouse that all these punks were living in?
Yeah, it was I feel like it was like the second floor or maybe the third floor where they lived. That
Mhm.
was Fort Thunder. And so yeah, it was a warehouse space, and then they built rooms, and
Like a
corner.
little like Shantyville.
Yep. They had like the little shanties, like Chippendale had kind of like this, the way I remember it, and I'm probably going to get things a little bit wrong, but he had almost like this hut, like off in a corner area, but it was kind of its own freestanding thing. And it was covered in, like there was a wall leading over to the hut that was just covered in all the garbage that he had left over from packaging and stuff. So it was like clean, but it was, he was keeping track of, the blister packs of tofu or whatever.
Yeah.
And then he would wallpaper with silk screens. He'd do silk screen wallpaper and put that on the outside and on the inside. And there'd be a loft. So I remember going in there, and might have been able to walk in, but I might have had to crawl in. And then like he'd be up in the loft, sitting there drawing on his loft
Yeah.
bed. And maybe he would have comics on the walls. I know that Matt Brinkman had like little tiny doors on his room. And so like you'd look through this little door and there'd be a little tiny creature, like in a little lighted setting in there, stuff like that. There was always little like kind of great art school things. And then obviously like, a big section was devoted to like rehearsal space. And a big section was devoted to silk screening area
Okay.
and stuff like that.
Were they doing that for a living? Like they selling silkscreen prints and stuff?
They would sometimes do prints for people and get paid to do
Hmm.
that. I don't know what they would do. I don't know that they needed to make much money.
Hmm.
So I don't think they concern themselves with that too much. A lot of times the silkscreen prints were just for shows that
Okay.
were there or at another club. And maybe somebody gave them money, or maybe they just said, "Hey, Matt, will you make a poster?" And he just did. It's just that weird, you're in your early 20s and I don't know.
Yeah, you
The
do whatever
the
you want.
economy means nothing to
Yeah,
you.
that's
A
right.
cheap place to live, and they're
Yeah.
dumpster diving food and whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
Did you publish any of their stuff? Did you do a Matt Brinkman or Brian Chippendale comic?
I did Matt and Brian Ralph.
What
And
was the Matt Brinkman one that you did?
I did Territory Heights.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that was a collection of the mini comics and stuff that I'd seen up to that point. And I'm sure I'm gonna weirdly leave something out, but also like I would distribute, like Jim Drain and Leaf Goldberg
Hmm.
and um and Chippendale minis.
Did you
Uh,
do Crumb Bums, the Brian Ralph comic?
so Crumbums is I think that was his Xeric comic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was doing like a mini comic as well, or
He
something.
was
But
doing a few mini comics, like he was doing Fireball, and when I met him and I asked him to do a collection of Fireball, and he said, you know, he was, I guess he said, yeah, sure. And then he kind of was like, oh, I got this other thing, Cave In. Maybe you want to do that. Because he figured he didn't want to like be introduced to like a larger comics world with like his juvenilia.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he wanted to like make a splash, like here's a new thing that I did. Which totally was smart and made sense. You know, but at the time, like doing a collection like of your juvenilia just like could sell. It made sense, right? Nobody
Well,
was thinking like, this is great, but I need to see your graphic novel.
yeah, exactly.
Like
Yeah.
that was not something we said then.
Was Cave In one of the first books that you published?
Yeah. I think the first two were Tiny Bubbles by James Kachalka and Queen of the Black Black by Megan Kelso. Yeah, yeah. So I'm pretty sure she had the idea for the overlay there, which you can kind of see the hints of.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, that was like there's kind of like separate boxes. Who's the artist? I cannot remember the name. It's like just on the tip of my tongue. A sculptor. I want to say it's like Louise something.
I have no
Um,
idea.
so what that is that in that story, Queen of the Black Black is kind of about her. So she would make like these sculptures out of you know, found objects like spindles on stairs and you know, arms of chairs and you know, pieces of wood, and it would all be collaged together into a
Hmm.
sculpture and you know, painted like one color something. So that's kind of what she was working with. So
And then what I think one of the things that you did with High Water that people ripped off later was the paper stock, because you used a better paper stock than any other publisher at the time.
yeah, I mean, I took a lot of stuff from so Michelle Verana from Black Eye had
Mm-hmm.
kind of really upped like the design aesthetics and stuff. And I think he was you know, he was a designer,
Yeah.
like he had real design jobs and everything, and then started putting out comics. And so he was applying that stuff and it was really into paper stocks. And so he kind of was the guy who did that like the matte laminate. So the comics are really like velvety and you're like, what is
Mm.
going on here? You
Yeah.
know? So and he, you know, he influenced Chris at Drawn and Quarterly, and I think he even did some design work for Chris. You know, they were both in Montreal, so he would, you know, I think they would share a catalog and stuff, but I don't really remember. Chris also had his own thing for sure. And that's all post raw in a way too, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, so I worked next to a bookstore, a really big bookstore. And so I would go in there on my lunch break from Million Year Picnic and just look for ideas.
Hmm.
So I'd see like the dimpled stock on the cover, like Black Sparrow Press.
Yeah, that's
Be
right.
like that. I always like that, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
when you discover those books, like, you know, maybe you're like you're a young smartass and you go looking for a Bukowski book,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're like, what's this? You know, who's John Fonte? Who's, you know,
Yeah.
like, because they all have that design and that feel.
Yeah.
Um, so I wanted to create that kind of thing. And Cornelius had that kind of, you know, the French
Oh.
publisher Cornelius had that kind of like different like thick stocks and silk screening, but made to look really like nice art books. So it was always just kind of like trying to make those objects that would stand out on the comic shelves, you know, from
Yeah.
that mess. And I know like Cave In was, I was looking for a thick paper stock, and of course thicker paper gets expensive. And then the guy that I was dealing with, I think it was Patrick, said this. Patrick Jodoin said, you know, we have this blow card stock, which is that's the postcards that come in
Hmm.
magazines.
Yeah.
So that's what Cave In is printed on, and it was
Oh.
super cheap, and it was thicker because I was afraid of like Cave In being too thin.
Yeah.
Right? It was like it's only 120 pages or something. So it's like if this is too thin, people will just dismiss it. But if it's a nice fat little book,
Mm-hmm.
you know, people will really go for it.
But
So
these rounded edges and stuff, I don't think you wouldn't have seen that on a lot of books at the time. You know.
no, and that was Jordan and I like competing with each other. Jordan Crane, because he actually used the rounded corners first on an issue of Non.
Okay.
So he beat me. He finished that project, and he was working on this book. I didn't have the technological know-how to do a complicated book like this.
Yeah.
And I had the idea to have the little episodes within this book change color
Mm-hmm.
and do Pantones. And of course, that was tremendously expensive. So anything I saved on, paper stock was blown by the fact that I might have a signature, like a 16-page block that had 4 Pantone colors or something ridiculous like that.
How were you funding this stuff by just like you'd bring in money from sales of other comics and then be like, okay, I think I have enough to put out a
Yeah, and
Ryan Roll.
I think I got like $1,000 from my folks
Mm-hmm.
for Cooper Skeever, the superhero thing. That was the first book, right? That was the first book I printed.
Oh, I thought there was a Cooper Skeeber one that was like an Angoulême giveaway.
Right. That's true. That's not, but that was photocopied, right?
Okay.
And then Cooper Skeever 2 was offset. So
Yeah.
that was sort of the first. I mean, it's hard to say, right? I guess you could count my minis. Although I think Cooper Skeever 1 says Eyewater Books on the back.
Oh, okay.
Then I changed the name to Highwater.
What, so were you going to Angoulême that year and you're like, let me have a comic to
Yeah,
hand?
yeah. So I basically put together a comic in like a month to bring and to hand out to people. And that was not like the currency of French comics at all. It was a very American thing
Mm-hmm.
to do, and they just did not know what to make of it. That I was putting out this free comic with a photo cover and with
Yeah.
like a little Chris Ware scroll on it, and that made no sense.
So did you feel like at that time doing High Water, like I'm gonna make comics that look more literary, and then that will be like some kind of signal to customers that
Hold
this
on.
is to be taken seriously?
Yeah, it was really as simple as that, and it
Yeah.
was idealistic and a bit wrong-headed, but that was totally just, yeah, that was the plan. It has happened in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you're at the mercy of so many, you know, so many things. You're at the mercy of bookstores, and you're at the mercy of mainstream publishing, and what they are interested in. If they're not interested in anything we're doing,
Mm-hmm.
the press is just not going to be there. The mainstream is, those publishing houses are going to occupy time and attention with, what they're doing.
Yeah,
So
I think it did. I think it did change in that like we're more likely to get, um, mainstream attention that you wouldn't have gotten in the '90s, right? So like there was
yeah,
something that changed, but then young adult and manga have become such a big thing that a lot of the focus is on that stuff because that's like kind of it seems newer to the mainstream or something.
yeah, and it just makes sense. They're like, I mean, many people aren't convinced
Hmm.
of comics, and we all know that there are a bunch of comics that aren't that sophisticated
Hmm.
and aren't really adult,
Yeah.
but are being kind of pushed as that. You know, that's just part and parcel. I mean, it's the same with books and movies and whatever. There's things that are being championed, and you're like, it's a little light.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
and partially, I think it's a lot of people aren't convinced that anything deep can be going on in comics, anyways. So it makes more sense. It'll help kids read.
Hmm.
So let's get on it.
With Cooper Skeeber, did that really put High Water on the mark? I mean, like when that came out and you're handing out to people suddenly were paying attention to High Water because of
Oh yeah,
that?
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it was that I mean that was designed to be a publicity stunt. I
Yeah.
specifically was hoping to get sued, and I gave the copyrights to the characters away to the artist who drew it. So I gave
Nice.
Incredible Hulk to James Kachalka and Spider-Man to Ron Rigi.
Hmm.
I had Guardians of the Galaxy So totally wanted to get sued. And that's I met a guy who worked for Wired magazine, and so he wrote up a thing on, Cooper Skiber and Wired. And so, I mean, it was a print media time then, right? It wasn't an internet time. So that was a big deal. Getting written up in Wired was like as big as you could hope for,
Mm-hmm.
as far as like, countercultural and interesting. Um,
Do you have copies of that left?
yeah, I have a couple of cases kicking around, or maybe a case, or maybe a handful. I'm not sure. Maybe it's just a handful. I was nearly out, and then my brother lives in Pasadena, and he was preparing to move. So one time when I was visiting him, he pulled out like a case.
Oh,
Um, and I think right before I was going to San Diego, so like he pulled out a case of a couple of different books.
you should
There
put
were,
those on eBay.
yeah, and I've been meaning to get some. This is a good time to mention that I'm going to sell some stuff on
Yeah.
eBay from the collection, not just a R. Crumb poster, but
Yeah.
some old back issues and things like that. I'm going to put that stuff up soon. Like High Water, I was convinced that I like this, everybody will like this. That's enough.
Yeah.
And
Right.
now I know, I know there are different kinds of audiences, and I know people are, looking at books for different reasons. I don't fully understand all those reasons,
Mm-hmm.
classic old man style, there's a lot of modern cartooning that I kind of don't get,
Mm-hmm.
there's plenty that I love. But sometimes there's just like that's not connecting with me. I can't. The way these characters are
Yeah.
talking makes me insane.
You did you discover Ron Rigi?
I would never say I discovered anybody.
You may as well.
Um, so Ron was in Cambridge, and he worked at a copy shop near the Million Year Picnic, and he would come in and sell his comics there before I was around. So it was just very obviously, we became friendly because, you know, we were interested in a lot of the same things.
But you never published his work at High Water, did you?
Yeah, for sure.
Oh,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
did?
Yeah, I published the Boys comic and
Oh, okay.
Skibber Be By, and Yeast Hoist does music make you cry. It's got like the white cover.
So wait a second. Didn't Skipper Bebop come out from D&Q as well?
It did. Yeah.
There was
So it's out
another
of print,
edition.
and so D&Q printed it. Yeah.
Did you print it in color originally?
There's a color section.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the mini comics that he would have been showing you at Million Year Picnic would have been reprinted in Against Pain.
Um, no, not necessarily. I'm trying to think. There's some stuff that wasn't in there. There'd be things like Andy Remembers, which is a really early one, and
Huh.
it doesn't look like him at all. It has more of a kind of 80s new wave feel to it. He
Hmm.
hadn't sort of shifted his style. I think there were more like blocks of black, which I think he got rid of because he decided that didn't photocopy well,
Yeah.
because you would get those kind of like, it'd be all gappy, right? Like you'd
Yeah.
end up with white spots in it. So he got rid of that stuff. And that's how he ended up with those thin lines, because they photocopied well.
Oh,
Um,
I see.
and then Dum Dum Posse Reader was like, that was his big project. Do you
Hmm.
have that one?
I don't. I've never seen
It's
it.
got the spiral bound and cardboard covers.
No, I've never even seen that.
That's a pretty amazing comic.
Hmm.
And so that was his first like big sort of graphic novel
Hmm.
thing.
Do you handle submissions at D&Q today?
I do. I read every single one of them every day. That's a big part of my job, like 5 or 6 or 7 a day.
Wow. Where do they come from? Email or in the mail?
Yeah, I go through the email. And a few of us, Francine and Peggy and Tracy, also are on that email, but I'm the one who I make sure that I read them all.
And do you deal with agents at this point?
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah. So I wonder how do you know like what is there something that you're like looking for that you go like this is something that we could work with, and this is, I mean, what is there like a certain aesthetic that you think is D and Q?
For sure. And I try to keep that in mind, but I try to break it sometimes,
Hmm.
because I'm aware of that. If it's too, I want to make things too rigid,
Hmm.
you know? So, but I mean, it's the same thing as like you go into a comic shop and you go through the stacks and everything, and there's a lot of stuff that you just kind of go like, nah, nah, nah. And you might pass over things that later you're kind of interested in. I mean, that's bound to happen, right?
Hmm.
It's just a matter of like state of mind. Um, and so a lot of times it's very much a gut reaction, like,
Yeah.
no, this
Huh.
is wrong. And sometimes it's like Marvel tryout pages or things like that, right?
Yeah.
Or I don't know, like robot comic or
Hmm.
something that I'm like, I can't do anything with this.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, um, and then sort of the next level is can this person cartoon?
Hmm.
Do they understand like the formal aspects of cartooning? Um,
And
So
storytelling.
that, so I mean, yeah, and as you would expect, a lot of the submissions don't meet that.
Hmm.
I mean, we're talking a couple a year in many cases, out of how many per day, anywhere from 2 to 10 submissions a day. So it's a lot. It's a lot that aren't, um, there. And I know, all the usual stuff that comics editors do these days. Look at Instagram,
Hmm.
listen to who people are talking about, and go check it out. You know, it's not all based on fully what I think is good. I'm trying to make that decision for other people, like what I think other people will like,
Hmm.
and not like other people should like this, but like other people will like this.
You've had some pretty good successes. I think the first big success I've heard you talk about was the Moomin, bringing Moomin over to D and Q,
Yeah,
which was a
yeah.
huge success. I mean, that.
Yeah, and it still remains like a strong seller for us. So it's just yeah, I mean, a lucky fluke, right? Dylan Horrocks gave me that photocopy of Moomin comics that he got from Paul Gravette, and I was like, these are amazing. What's the deal here? And the comics being great, like that doesn't matter.
Hmm.
I mean, it matters, of course, right? But it doesn't mean anything for sales. We've all seen that.
Yeah.
But what I didn't realize is just how many like kind of Scandinavians were scattered across, the US
Yeah.
and the UK, and had some sort of fond memory of Moomin chapter books, or just the toys, or seeing a toy, or just the images. Um,
Yeah. It's
like here,
amazing that it took so long for somebody to do it in English.
yeah, somebody was just saying like, they said, when did you publish those Moomins? And I was like, I don't know, it was like 15 years ago or something, maybe it's longer. And he goes, it seems like you're like 10 years too late for that. I was like, well, I mean,
No.
yes, somebody could have published
Yes.
those years before, but whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, seems obvious now, sure, pal. But
Yeah.
so that was just like a really lucky, fluke. We couldn't know that all these people were waiting.
Yeah.
And it was kind of the same thing with Linda Barry. Like Linda was the next kind of like big signing.
Oh yeah.
And we couldn't know, we knew it was just Linda. Like Peggy, Chris, and I were like, Linda is the best.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable that Linda doesn't have a publisher. Um, and so that was fully just like, like a prestige project or something. Like
Hmm.
we published Linda Barry. And we just kind of had no idea that there were all these people, you know, who had like such fond memories of Linda. And we had no idea that she would give us a book about drawing
Hmm.
that connected to her workshop and how much her workshop had meant to people.
Yeah.
like she offered us that book and we were like, oh no, that's not why we were signing you. We wanted,
Yeah.
Ernie Poots Comique. Which of course,
Yeah.
things like Syllabus sell like crazy.
Yeah.
So, you know,
But you guys, D&Q does not do comic conventions anymore, right? Besides maybe San Diego.
well, I mean, that was true, but it's not true. So we actually will be going back to a lot of the shows.
Oh, okay.
So it became kind of it just became tough to manage. And there was a bunch of shows and just we all had done so many shows that we just were tired of doing them. And it's hard to make like a new employee go and work for an entire weekend.
Yeah.
It's not the same thing as like, man, that seems like the most fun imaginable that I go and stay in a hotel and the Hernandez brothers are there.
Uh-huh.
And like I get to talk to cartoonists the whole time. But it wasn't that way. And it was expensive. I mean, the West Coast is very far away for us and a different country. So, the expenses add up. But we're going to try to do kind of more, skeleton crew like things and go to the shows again and just be a presence there. So
do you have like a list? Do you have like a list of like what shows?
It's going to be, I mean, we've done like some book kind of events stuff that the average person wouldn't hear about, and we didn't stop doing those. But we'll be back. We've already made plans at TCAF and talked to them and everything. So that's set up. And we'll be back at SPX and we'll go to CXC. We haven't actually done CXC at all ever. So we'll do that next time. So we'll start doing those a bit more.
That's the show.
It's tough because the shows are hard, but then you don't do them, and like people don't see you, right? And then it's just like whatever happened to, whatever happened to Peggy,
that's the value of it,
Yeah,
you have to be there.
And, I mean, the old days of going to SPX, right, is that everybody went and you just saw everybody. And that would even happen at San Diego. Like everybody went to San Diego and you would see everybody, you see all your friends and you're just palling around with your friends. And now like you go and you might see like one of your old pals, go to San Diego and Kachalka is there. And like, oh, James, I didn't know you were going to be here, and he's like, I am. And now I have to go do a signing, and then I don't see him. It's more like we shared a hotel room, we shared a bed, for the entire week.
Oh yeah,
or whatever you're out there.
How well did this book sell?
Not well. It did not sell well. I like that's the book you have at the ready. Yeah, I mean, it just was his son contacted me and had a couple of other things, and I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, I always liked that kind of side thing. And I was like, it's the guy who did Corduroy, like I should be able to sell some of these, but not necessarily. Of course, that's not how people look at it. That's how I realized. I was like, oh, you do Corduroy and you become a millionaire because people love Corduroy. You don't sell a million of everything you do.
Yeah.
But he's a fascinating character. He had like an art magazine that he also did.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
He also did like, street drawing and stuff. And so it was kind of and other people would be in this magazine. So he had this kind of neat, almost like zine that he did as well. That I was hoping, even though I knew by then, I was like, oh, that would never sell. It's just a neat thing to collect, but that never happened.
I like that book actually. That's why I have it out at the ready, because I was just looking at it again.
It's neat from that kind of like that was children's books was a money-making job right? If you got the right, if you had the hit, I suppose, right? Like
Yeah.
maybe having a hit song. And otherwise you're just kind of slogging away. But I liked that, like, those guys like kind of wanted to experiment, right?
Yeah.
And so, this is one of his little side experiments, like, oh, let me try to, tell a story with these drawings without a bunch of words. Okay, we'll do a part 2,
Yeah.
6 months from now, and we'll get
Okay.
into the Q stuff.
Okay.
All right, thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, man. I
All right,
appreciate it.
bye.
Have a good day.